What if I told you that you could design and live the life that you want on your own terms? Would you do it? Would you take a leap into the unknown? Or would you settle for a life of limits, a life of safety but lacking true meaning? Zeph and Moses Blacksburg here, and I'm on a journey to help you ignite your inner passions, let go of your fears, and get more out of life. Will you join me and make this year your year of purpose? Welcome to the Year of Purpose podcast. Hey everyone, and welcome to the Year of Purpose podcast. This is Zeph and Blacksburg, and today I have Gretchen Rubin. Now, Gretchen is one of the most thought-provoking and influential writers on habits and happiness. Her next book, Better Than Before, is about how we change our habits. Her books, The Happiness Project and Happier at Home, were both instant New York Times bestsellers, and The Happiness Project spent more than 2 years on the bestseller list, including at number 1. Her books have sold more than 2 million copies in 30 different languages. On her blog, she writes about her adventures as she test drives ideas from contemporary science and ancient wisdom about building good habits and a happier life. Gretchen, how are you doing today?
I'm very happy to be talking to you.
Well, thank you so much for spending some time with me today. You know, I stumbled upon you when I found the Happiness Project. There's a Facebook page. I found it while I was looking at ways that I could become happier because in truth, everyone's looking to be happier. This is something that is not original, is nothing new. This is something that's been happening for quite some time now. And so, I looked online to see what was out there, and I found this thing called the Happiness Project. Now, I realized that it's more than just a book. You wrote a book that was on the bestseller list for 2 years, but now it's kind of turned into a bit of a movement called the Happiness Project. So could you maybe tell us a little bit about what the Happiness Project is and how it's progressed?
Yeah, well, I was a writer. I was just finishing up my biography of JFK, and I was stuck on a city bus in the pouring rain. And I had one of those rare opportunities for reflection that you don't often get in the tumult of everyday life. And I thought, well, what do I want from life anyway? And I thought, well, I want to be happy. But I realized I didn't spend any time thinking about whether I was happy or whether I could be happier. And as often happens to me, I become obsessed with an idea and want to do a huge amount of research. So I ran to the library the next day, got this giant stack of books, and started researching happiness. And before too long, I realized that it was such a deep, rich subject that I didn't want to just do it for myself on my own while I was, kind of as a hobby project. I really wanted it to be my next book. And so I decided that I would really spend a year and think about everything that I wanted, try to learn about happiness, whether we can make ourselves happier, how we can make ourselves happier, and then try it out and see if I really did all that stuff. If I tried it, would I be happier? And as part of it, one of the things I needed to try was the idea that novelty and challenge bring happiness. This is something that all the happiness researchers will tell you. I have to say that in my case, I thought, no, I like familiarity and mastery. So I don't think that novelty and challenge are going to be important for me. But to test that, I decided to start a blog. And so as part of writing the book, I also started a blog. And so now I have this blog that I've had, for 8 or 9 years, all about happiness and habits and human nature, as well as the books that I've been writing on those subjects.
So oftentimes when it comes to being happy, I found, and maybe you found this too, that we aren't being present. We aren't really being there in the moment to experience what's happening. We're always on this mindset of go, 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 one thing, the next thing, the next thing, wash, rinse, repeat. And we forget to stop and smell the roses, so to speak. We forget to take a moment, take everything in, and kind of just evaluate where we are, in our day, in our life, in our year, and in that specific moment. So do you think that we're losing sight of happiness because we're not being present there in the moment?
Well, that's a very interesting question. And I think you put your finger right on it, which is it's kind of this idea of mindfulness, of even stopping and asking yourself the question, am I as happy as I can be? And it's funny because there's this whole theme within happiness. And it's like people like, David Hume and Eleanor Roosevelt, all these very estimable people who say basically, if you try to make yourself happier, you won't be. Like, you'll get in your own way. I think David Hume said, ask yourself if you are happy and you shall cease to be so. Or it's this idea that happiness is like a side effect. It's not something that you should aim for. But really, in my view, you don't hit a target by not aiming at it or not thinking about it. And that really, by asking yourself, am I as happy as I can be? What can I do to be happier? You really make it much more likely that you are going to bring about those changes, like the kind of changes you made to make yourself happier. And then sometimes people will be like, well, I don't want to make myself happier. I want to live a life full of meaning and, engagement with other people and have, fulfilling work. And I'm like, well, yeah, that's exactly what you would do if you wanted to be happier. So I think that just stopping and saying to ourselves, what's going on here? Does my life reflect my interests, my values, my nature? Are there things that I could do to make myself happier? I think for most people, there's some low-hanging fruit that doesn't take that much time, energy, or money and really can make a big difference.
So happiness can come from these small things, like you said, from the low-hanging fruit. I personally found happiness through rowing. This was something that I never thought in a million years I would see myself doing. My only memory of actually enjoying being on the water was when I was on, a boat on the lake at our vacation house with my dad and our family on our vacations. But other than that, I would think back to being on our fishing trips and getting sick and nauseous and seasick. So, there's these little things that we can find throughout our lives. For many of us, actually, it's fitness. From the runners to the lifters to now my passion, which is rowing. We can find these little low-hanging fruit type things that we can do. And, that kind of makes me wonder, is happiness something that's maybe simpler than we're making it out to be? So, my question to you is, are we overcomplicating this? Is happiness something that is actually fairly simple and we're just forcing it?
Is it simpler than we make it out to be?
Like, for example, one of the things that I found is so many people are like, I need more money, I need more money, I need more clients, more work, more this, more that. And that's been such a huge thing for them that they focused on what they're lacking. They focus on this thing that they don't have. So they're putting this negative vibe out into the world of, they need something. And so people can kind of sense that and they stay away from it. So I just wonder, is it something where it's simpler than we're trying to make it out to be?
Well, it's interesting. There was this study that I read, and I keep meaning to look back at it to refresh my recollection about it, what exactly it said. But as I recall, what the study did is it asked people, what's most important to you about work? And it turned out that money was not in the top 3 or 4. It was there. It was like in the top 10, but it wasn't at the top. But then when they said, what do you think other people value most about work? They said other people value money. I think that we tend to think that other people value money more than they do. I think that my sense is that most people kind of get it, that like just having more money, just more cash in their pocket is not going to make them happy. And that people get the idea that it's how you spend it and it's the decisions that you make. Now, that doesn't mean that they're doing that. It doesn't mean that they're necessarily following that and spending their money wisely in the ways that are going to have the biggest happiness bang for the buck. But I don't think that there are many people who think that simply making more money past a certain point of a certain level is going to make them happier. Now, of course, one of the greatest luxuries that money can buy is the freedom not to have to worry about money. And money, I think, is something like health, where we experience it much more in the negative than in the positive. So if you don't have enough money, then you're very concerned about that. And it's a big, big worry and it's a big negative. But then once you sort of have enough, then other things begin to matter and you sort of see, and that's where decisions with money matter more. Like, are you spending your money, on a new bicycle or on cocaine? That's going to make a difference in your long-term happiness. So I think all these things are kind of that we need to think about them because they play out in how we make the decisions that will affect our happiness.
Interesting. So do you think that there's any obstacles that are actually preventing us from being happy in our life?
I think one of the biggest obstacles is loneliness. And if I could say that something should be studied more or addressed more, I think it would be loneliness, because One of the things that comes up most often when I'm talking to people is like, what do you do if you're in your 30s and you move for your job to a place where you don't know anybody and you don't have any family? Like, how do you make friends as a 30, or, for a lot of people, so it's harder to make friends. People are really busy with a bunch of different things. And so it's hard to maintain relationships. Like, you have these friends, but you feel like you're not maintaining them, because friendship takes time. It takes time and energy. Or, sometimes people have a very active social circle, but they're missing a romantic partner. And for many people, they want both of those elements of relationships. They want that one intimate partner, like that quiet presence in the house, like somebody who's just with you, as well as a lively social scene. Not everybody needs that, but for some people that's a real source of concern as well. And so I think and if you look at like what do ancient philosophers and contemporary scientists agree, if you had to pick the one thing for happiness, that would be relationships. We need to have strong, enduring, intimate relationships. We have to feel like we belong. We need to be able to confide. We need to be able to give and get support. And when you look at the people who are happier, they tend to be people who have more strong relationships. And so I think that loneliness or feeling so busy that you can't maintain a meaningful relationship with the people in your life. I think that is a big stumbling block.
So there's this connection of being lonely and being happy here. And actually, something that I read recently that I've been learning a little bit more about is a lot of researchers are saying that the reason why people have this urge to text while they're driving is because it's the time that we're alone. It's the time that we're without people, without interaction. And so more and more people are texting while driving rather than, any other place, or they're more tempted to text while driving because they are alone. They're in this little bubble for, their commute to work or their commute to wherever they're going. So, it's more than just going from the house to the grocery store. They're texting because they're on this long haul and they're lonely.
Well, it's interesting that you say that, because one of the things, you have a podcast, so I'd be curious if you have the same experience, but my sister and I just started a new podcast called Happier with Gretchen Rubin, and it's tons of fun. And one of my goals for all of my happiness is to spend more time with my sister, because it's one of the most important relationships in my life. But I live in New York City. She lives in LA. We're both super busy. And with the time change and the distance, it's hard. And so it's great to have something that we work on together. But one of the things that's really struck me, and I wonder if you've experienced this, is many people, when they're talking to me about the podcast, they will say, it's like having a new friend. I listen to you in the car. I listen to you when I'm walking. And it's like hanging out with a friend. And and I never thought about, well, maybe it is kind of like, it is something that's sort of like somebody's talking inside your head and you're participating with somebody's conversation. And so it's not exactly like having a friend, but it kind of, maybe it's sort of in that vein of wanting connection and wanting to draw closer to people, especially in some place like a car where you're kind of trapped and maybe, there's not that much going on of high value. So if you can do something that's interesting and fun and kind of gives you that feeling of engagement, that's it. I wonder if that's related. That's interesting. I don't know if you've experienced that with podcasts, that people say they feel connected to you in some way. Because my sister and I have definitely noticed how often people have commented like that.
Yeah, I've definitely found that when I'm in the car listening to a podcast, I actually respond as if that person were there with me. So if they say something that I resonate with, I might smile. If they say something that I think is funny, I'll laugh out loud. And I'm alone. And it's so neat to see how I respond almost in the same way that you would if someone were right there next to you, And so it's kind of like you're not lonely anymore. You actually get to have someone there with you. So if you're listening to the podcast right now in the car, first of all, kudos to you for not texting and driving and doing something much more productive. But, I'm here with you, and so is Gretchen. So it's great that you don't have to be alone right now.
Yeah. So that's better than texting. That's probably a lot safer than texting while you're driving, which is pretty much the worst idea. If there's any habit that no one should have, it's the habit of texting while they're driving. So yeah, that's not good.
Well, we can only hope that with all of the technology that we have right now, maybe one day in the future our phones will realize that they are flying through the air at, 60 miles an hour, and they'll disable that ability to text, because that would be an important safety feature that I'm surprised isn't in them right now, especially considering that they can already track how far we're running and how many steps we take in a day. But yeah, so what I really wanted to get into was, you kind of started this movement out of the Happiness Project. Tell me what happened there. How did it go from being just a book to being something that was making a huge impact across the entire country and, if not the world?
It's interesting. I mean, I think it was funny because when I was writing the book, or when I would talk to people before it came out, just people around me, people that I knew, they had sort of two reactions. One was, well, the story of your happiness project is not going to be interesting because you are so ordinary, you're so boring that no one will be interested. They would say that in a loving way, but that was basically it. And the other people would say, you're so idiosyncratic, no one is ever going to identify with you. And so there was sort of this feeling like, well, no one's gonna, it's not gonna strike a chord with anyone. But what I found out, and I think this is so interesting, and it's just about kind of human nature, is that often, you think you would learn more about happiness or good habits or something if you were reading about, big scientific studies that looked at large populations, or philosophical treatises that looked at, human nature. But in fact, I think people most respond to someone else's story. And I know that when I was thinking about my own happiness project and who I learned from, or what I learned from, the sources that I learned from first were the people around me, especially when I was writing my habits book, Better Than Before. I found it so instructive just to talk to people about their experiences, or also other people's like memoirs, or their own accounts. So someone like Benjamin Franklin, or Saint Therese of Lisieux's, extraordinarily influential to me memoir called Story of a Soul. One person's story taught me more about myself than just about anything else. And I think that there was something about the Happiness Project where I wasn't coming from a place of deep unhappiness, not that much changed in my life. And yet I think I was somehow able to present information, not, most of which was not that surprising to anybody. I think with happiness, most of us need to be reminded more than informed about the things that will make us happier. But I think that kind of hearing what I did suggested to people the kind of thing they could do. It's like, well, Gretchen's really into reading, so she started a book group. Well, I'm not that into reading, but I could go biking with my friends every Saturday. Like, you get the point. Or, you figure, you see enough of yourself that you can think about, well, in this way I'm like her, in this way I'm not like her. This is what I would do. And so I think that's why it sort of took off with other people, was this idea that if I just really sit down and think about the things that are most important to me, and the very specific, concrete, manageable things I could do as part of my everyday life, these are the things that I could do. And and some of them are really small. Like, one of the ones that people mention to me all the time is, which I wrote about in my book, Happier at Home, which is all about happiness specifically at home, was to give warm hellos and goodbyes. So in our household, every time someone comes or goes, they get a real hello, meaning everybody comes to them and really like speaks to them and hugs or kisses them or whatever. And I started this because we were getting in a really bad habit of people just sort of grunting out from across the room and not really paying attention when people came and went from the apartment. And I really did not like that. I wanted to have a more tender, attentive atmosphere in our household. So we all talked about it. Usually I don't have group habits that people follow, but in this case we all agreed. And it's made a tremendous difference in the atmosphere of our household, just in terms of the feeling of lovingness and connection. And so I think it's like, but that doesn't take a lot of time, energy, or money. I think a lot of people are like, yeah, I could do that. My family, we could totally do that. And then they do it, and then they're happier, So I think that's why it sort of caught on.
You are absolutely right. I see this happen all the time where, I'm leaving the house, or I see it at someone else's house, and it's just like, all right, see you later, get out of here. There's no real interaction there. And I think that we could also obtain so much more gratitude and be so much more present and in the moment if we were doing this. So, thank you so much for adding that to my list of things that I could improve upon. And I'm sure many of our listeners will take that back to their homes as well and want to use that too. Now, you've got this other book out there now, and it's called Better Than Before, and it's all about how we change our habits, right?
Yep, and specifically how you can change your habits, because for a lot of people that's a big happiness challenge, is some habit that they can't master.
So you had a little bit of a story about how your previous book had come about. You're sitting on a bus during that rainy day. Do you have a specific moment in time where, Better Than Before just kind of came to you and the idea just kind of popped in your head?
Well, it sort of came on me gradually, because I noticed that whenever I would talk to people about happiness, whenever they were talking about a big happiness boost, or even more often a big happiness challenge that they were facing, they very often pointed to something that at its core was a habit issue. Like, oh, my problem is that I'm exhausted all the time. Well, that's really about the habit of getting enough sleep. So I was getting interested, more and more drawn into the subject of habits and kind of the related issues of willpower and self-control and procrastination, that kind of thing. And then I had lunch with a friend, and she said something that got me obsessed with habits. And then this is when I was like, I have to crack the riddle of habits. And what she said to me, because I was asking her about her habits, and and she's like, well, this is the thing. I know I would be happier if I had the habit of exercising. And what's weird is when I was in high school, I was on the track team, and I never missed track practice. But I can't go running now. Why? And I thought, well, why? Because it's the same person, it's the same behavior. At one time it was effortless. Now she can't do it. What is going on with her habits? And it just, with that, I became just, that was all I could think about was habits, and wanting to really come up with a framework that would explain everything that I saw in habits. Because often the experts will sort of say one thing, like, oh, you should do it first thing in the morning, or you should start small, or you should do it for 30 days, or give yourself a cheat day. That's what's going to work. And it's like, well, that's not wrong, but it's like that works for some people some of the time in some situations. Like I wanted to account for everything that I saw in habits. And so that's when I became determined to write Better Than Before.
And you brought up a really good point there about how, creating these habits aren't exactly easy. So why do we find it so tough to create a habit for something that we love to do? Maybe it's your passion, but for whatever reason, it seems really complicated.
Well, I think in the case of my friend, I think there's a couple different answers for that. But one of the things that I discovered in the course of writing the book was that really I came up with a framework that divides everybody into one of four categories in terms of how they respond to expectations, and a habit is a kind of expectation: upholders, questioners, obligers, and rebels. And there's a quiz on my site if anybody wants to take a quiz. But the biggest tendency, and the one that's my friend, is that for obligers, they readily meet outer expectations, but they struggle to meet inner expectations. So for my friend, when she had a coach and a team, she had no trouble showing up. But when it was only her own inner expectation for herself, it was very hard for her to follow through. And so if that describes you, because this is the biggest tendency, the most number of people fall into this tendency. If there's something that you really love and yet you find that you never are following through with it, give yourself external accountability. For instance, a friend of mine was like, I love to read, but I never make time to read. Why is that? Well, then she joined a book group where you're really expected to read the book, and she reads. Or I was talking to these two people who were both obligers, who were like, what's the problem? Because we both love to cook, and we really want to bring home cooked meals to work every day, because we're eating all this junk food and it's expensive and it's not good for us. And yet, why is it that even though we cook and even though we're committed to the idea of healthy food, we just never do it, and we just keep ordering in every day? Well, so what they did is, because obligers need external accountability, they decided they would divide the time in half. Half the time one of them cooked, half the time the other one of them cooked. And so if it's your turn to cook, you have to cook, or the other person can't eat. And you have to eat what the person cooks for you because they made you lunch. And so again, it's the sense of external accountability. And so I have to say, of everything in the book, this is an idea that for many people has been huge. You don't have to worry about about priorities. You don't have to worry about motivation. You don't have to worry about self-esteem. You don't have to worry about sacrifice. If you have trouble following through on something that's important to you, give yourself external accountability. And on my site, I have a starter kit for people if you want to start a group for people holding each other accountable. Because that's one, think about AA or Weight Watchers. When a group comes together, they don't even have to be working on the same habits, but it's just the idea that that someone's going to be like, hey, you said you were going to spend more time learning how to play guitar. Have you been practicing guitar? Have you been taking, you said you were going to do it for half an hour every night. How's that going? Knowing that you have that external accountability for many people is really the crucial thing that's going to allow them to stick to it. Because just the fact that you love something doesn't mean that it's going to happen. And you need to figure out why something's not happening so that you can bring about circumstances that will allow it to actually happen.
Now, with how important these habits are to our lives, do you have any recommendation as far as, a basic foundation or basic pillar of what we should be doing, what habits we should be forming, or maybe what habits we should be focusing more on? We have Maslow's hierarchy of needs, things like food, water, shelter, things that we need as basics, but are there any particular habits that we need to have as a foundation to make ourselves better?
Yes, absolutely. And so in the book, I talk about the 21 strategies that people use to make or break habits. And you use the same strategies whether you're making them or breaking them. So that doesn't matter. And all of them are really powerful. But the one you're pointing to is what I call the strategy of foundation, which is that there's certain areas of behavior that go directly to self-mastery. And when you're trying to give yourself a good habit, you need to use self-mastery. Eventually, a habit allows the behavior to go on autopilot, which is excellent. But until you get that cemented in, you have to use your self-mastery. And in general, we want lots of self-mastery. You want as much self-mastery as you can have generally, because that's what allows you to do the things that you want to do and not do the things you don't want to do. So 4 areas of behavior go directly to self-mastery. And so they kind of have special priority. Like if you're going to work on anything or if you're going to try to start somewhere, these are the places to think about starting first because they're going to make it easier to do anything else you want to do. One area to think about is eating and drinking. Now, weirdly, one reason that people overeat is that they don't eat enough. You skip breakfast, you skip lunch, then you're so hungry that you're just grabbing anything, any junk food you can because you have to eat, right? You have to be satisfied in order to have that self-mastery. And drinking, I think we all get it. Part of the fun of drinking is that it lowers inhibitions. And so if you're drinking, it's going to be harder to stick to your good habits. Next, sleep. If you're exhausted, it's very hard to use your self-mastery. And this is when you get into people who are exhausted. They're getting by on 4 hours of sleep night after night, and then they're standing there at midnight in front of the freezer eating an entire pint of ice cream to try to recharge their battery. Most adults need 7 hours. It's really important to get your sleep. Moving around. You don't need to train for the marathon, but people often think they're too tired to exercise, but exercise actually boosts energy and self-mastery. It doesn't deplete it. And so you want to be up and moving around as much as you can. And then one thing that surprised me, I think those are all pretty obvious, but this surprised me. For most people, kind of more than you would expect, outer order contributes to inner calm and a sense of inner self-command. There is something, and it's kind of disproportionate effect that many people, and I certainly feel this way myself, feel like if they throw away their junk, if they put things in their proper places, if they get rid of things that they don't use or they don't love, if they clear off surfaces, if they make room in closets and shelves, that they just feel more in control of themselves. A friend of mine said, I finally cleaned my fridge and now I know I can switch careers. And I knew exactly what that felt like. And so those are the 4 areas I would say, if you're going to start anywhere, start with habits related to those behaviors because they're likely going to make it easier to do anything else that you want to do.
So start with those basic foundations, and I'm sure that it'll expand out into all the aspects of your life. Well, you mentioned some really great resources here that are on your website. Do you mind just sharing with the listeners and the viewers what the URL is for that, and also, how they can check out your podcast and stay in touch with you?
Yeah, absolutely. My site is called GretchenRubin.com, just my name, GretchenRubin.com. And in the resources section, I have all kinds of discussion guides and downloads for changing your habits, creating your own happiness projects, starting groups, all kinds of things that are meant to make it easier for you to do a happiness project or to tackle your habits. And my new podcast, which I'm loving, is called Happier with Gretchen Rubin. And I do that once a week for 25 minutes with my sister, who's a TV writer living in LA. And so we're sisters, so we don't let each other get away with much. And we talk about, the science, the philosophy, pop culture, and our own experiences about habits and happiness. And yeah, in this new book I'm very excited about, Better Than Before, is really all about this issue of habits, because habits, it turns out, are about 40% of our daily life. So if we have habits that work for us, we're just much more likely to be happier, healthier, and more productive. And if your habits don't work for you, then that is just going to be a much bigger challenge. So I think it's worth taking the time to focus on habits, bring that mindfulness that you were talking about for a happy life also to your habits. I mean, it's always mindfulness. Everything comes down to mindfulness in the end. It's all about mindfulness.
So mindfulness leading to creating better habits, leading to a happier life. I love it. Thank you so much for spending some time with me here today. It's been great speaking with you. And, for everyone listening in, definitely check out Gretchen's books. The new one is called Better Than Before. And she also has The Happiness Project and Happier at Home. And we'll be sure to link to those books on the website at www.yearofpurpose.com. Gretchen, thank you so much for being here today, and we will talk to you soon.
Thank you. Great to talk to you.
You've probably heard me talk about designing a life that you actually want to live. You might have even heard about my travels or experiences and thought to yourself, yeah, I do want to do that. Eventually, someday I'll probably do it, and my guess is that you've been thinking about doing it for a long time. So I want to tell you this. Stop thinking. Your time is right now. You don't need any more time. You don't need any more info. You don't need to keep putting it off and planning for the perfect time, because the truth of the matter is this. You could be the person who sits around and thinks about living a better life, or you can be the person that decides that today is the day that you're going to actually do it, and I want that for you. Because you already have what it takes. You've got a fire inside. Even if you can't see it right now, it's lit, but you need to open yourself up to the possibilities and throw a couple logs into the flames. So join me and the Year of Purpose tribe by subscribing to our YouTube channel and iTunes podcast. And if you really like us, please leave a review. This is Effin Moses Blacksburg, and I can't wait to see you again on the Year of Purpose podcast.